Okay, what's up, everyone? Back with another episode, and this one I wanted to do about Mark Fisher. Mark Fisher is one of my favorite cultural figures ever, one of the greatest ever to do it, and by do it, I mean think, make sense of the world, analyze culture. He comes out of the cyberpunk kind of world in the 90s. He was part of this collective called the CCRU, which was along with people like Nick Land, Sadie Plant, Ray Brassier, and a bunch of others, Kojo Eshin. And a lot of those people wound up to go on to be affiliated with what is called accelerationism or acceleration. But Mark Fisher's not exactly accelerationist. But he wrote a lot about music, brilliant writing about music, which is what we're really going to talk about. He also wrote a fair amount about depression. His angle on depression is utterly profound and really meaningful to me, really like on a personal level. It's not just philosophy. We'll talk about that a little bit. He suffered from brutal depression his whole life and eventually committed suicide in early 2017. Which still kind of haunts me when I think about it, thinking about what he was about as a thinker and as a man. So yes, Fisher was deeply anti-capitalist to the point of basically being a communist of a sort, but trying to imagine a futuristic form of communism. And two concepts which to him were relevant to all of his thought, but and we're going to talk about in relation to music. Two thoughts that he had were one is called that he calls capitalist realism, and the other he calls the slow cancellation of the future. Capitalist realism, he wrote a book called Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative? And what that basically is about is the fact that it is now impossible to imagine any other way of living other than under a capitalist system, neoliberal capitalism. And it's really a post-Cold War thing, and it's very depressing. Attendant to that is this idea of the slow cancellation of the future, which is the cultural sort of byproduct of that, which is that it's very hard to imagine a future on a sort of cultural level. Everything is super retro. Everything's retro now. I mean, there's always been retro, but now it's just cannibalistic 80s, 90s, just rehashing. It's not even considered weird. It's not even considered special to be retro. It's not even a gimmick or kitsch. It's just completely acceptable to make music that's just a museum piece from 30 years ago. And he sees this as a real problem, that we're at a real cultural impasse. Someone, a friend of mine who I respect quite a bit, Hunter Hunt Hendricks of Liturgy, wrote that you can't really have a subculture or a youth culture without some kind of utopian social vision. So without a utopian vision, you can't really have a subculture. Of course, you could argue against that, of course, but that's a similar sentiment, I think, to what Fisher was all about. Now, yeah. So, like, I mean, what he really wanted was to get into post-capitalist desire, to figure out a way for us to desire and want things that are beyond capitalism. They're not where capital doesn't have its tentacles in our hearts, you know? Yeah, so he wrote about this in relation to music a lot. His essay on Joy Division, absolutely everyone should check out. It's so deep, such a great writing about neoliberalism, politics in England and the world, and about depression. But I mostly want to talk about just his general idea that he says that that like we can't at this. He's writing in the teens, like 5-6 years ago. He writes that really ever since the 90s, there really hasn't been music that's coming out that couldn't have been made in prior decades. You know, he claims that they're really music after the 90s music in the aughts and in the tens, that there's hardly any music that you could say, oh, that could only be made now. That's a vision from right now. He really says that most stuff is rehashing the past. And he sort of looks to jungle from the 90s and dubstep and stuff, as an example of the last time there was a shock of the new. For him, that's a very political thing, the shock of the new. And it seems to be a big part of what he thinks would be a utopian vision, or at least some kind of a will toward a utopian vision of post-capitalist desire in music. And so he to him, neoliberalism and capitalist realism are killing the future, are killing our ability to imagine a future. And what he writes a lot about when the culture that he praises, contemporary culture, he talks about culture that is that has a hauntology to it. Hauntology, for him, it's another word that's very associated with Fisher. He gets this word from Derrida. For Fisher, it means culture, specifically music. He writes about film too, but music that is haunted by this lost sense of the future. It's haunted by a possibility. It's haunted by the impossibility of the future and sort of the ghost of what the future could be but can't be anymore. And the people, he even more than Joy Division, really to him, Burial. He wrote a bunch about Burial and the hyperdub stuff. And he also wrote a little bit about Drake and Kanye, the stuff from the aughts. For him, that aesthetic is hauntological in that there's this sad, mournful kind of gloom that sounds like you're sort of rummaging through dead rubble from the past, from the recent past, and trying to imagine some kind of future, but it's all muted and kind of vague and dead. This ghostly kind of non-future, especially, for Burial, that record Untrue, and some of the other ones. And but even in more mainstream stuff like Drake and Kanye, he finds that kind of ghostly non-future sound. Even though it's kind of numbed out, there's a sadness, a sadness to it. He also, his image of what an artist, a great artist or great intellectual is, he's really into, he's a very working class guy. I mean, coming straight out of the working class, and that's a really big thing to him. That for him, he was looking for what he called a popular modernism, which means something that is avant-garde and pushing toward the future, in his case, post-capitalist future, aggressively revolutionary like that, but coming from a working-class populist standpoint. So he's not talking about high art music pushing things forward. He's talking about experimentalism in a populist context. He wrote a little thing about Sleaford mods. I would say that guy, what is it, Paul Williamson, Dave Williamson, the guy from Sleaford Mods, definitely is like that. He's a working class. He's what Antonio Gramsci would call an organic intellectual. I love that idea. Someone who's an intellectual who arrives at these revolutionary sort of Marxist or Marxian, anti-capitalist, post-capitalist ideas and culture, but is arriving at it quote unquote organically. That's something that I think is really awesome, even though I very much do not come from a working class background, but this is something that I respect and love about Fisher and about Gramsci. So it's sort of like, for him, it's very different than poptimism. The whole pitchfork effect over the 2000s, over the aughts, poptimism was really the thing, which was basically like, hey, like, don't be a snob. Beyonce's great. Don't be a snob. Taylor Swift's great. You guys are snobs if you're not like gobbling up all the latest pop stuff. He's not on that vibe. Popular modernism for him is not poptimism, because he would write scathing reviews. He trashed the Arctic Monkeys, who I actually kind of like, but he was just like, this is camp, this is kitsch, this is fucking retro, and whack. And he does praise Rihanna, and like I said, Drake, for having these sort of haunted, hauntological aspects. But it's different. It's for him, real revolutionary culture, or culture that is moving towards something post-capitalist or revolutionary, has to have a negativity to it. And that doesn't mean a misery, although in Joy Division, of course, it does. But it has to have that sense of annihilation. He has that negative left vibe, and it's something that I feel like does kind of get lost in a sense, with that whole poptimist thing. Beyonce is, it's like Yas Queen feminism, and like you got to just be down with what, you're a snob if you trash the latest pop thing. He's into that negativity that moves things forward, so that you can imagine new futures. Now, a bunch of musicians are into Mark Fisher over the course of the tens. I keep saying tens, the teens. The stuff that really got associated with Fisher, I mean, maybe not through him writing about it particularly, but just other people, was Vaporwave. And in a way it makes sense, but in a way I'm not into it. I never liked Vaporwave, save for a few exceptions, but really I mostly was not into it. But however, Vaporwave really does, it really did capture that hauntological thing of this sort of rummaging through the past to the recent retro thing, but to make it this ghostly kind of haunted thing of like no future, but like rummaging through the past, haunted by these ghosts of no future. But the thing that I did not like about Vaporwave, and I can never get into, is that it didn't have that sadness to it. I mean, I guess some people might say that it did or does. But to me, that Vaporwave shit always had this very placid, kind of complacent sense of retro, where it always sounded like uncritical to me. It didn't have that negativity in what I heard of Vaporwave. It always had this sort of placid sound of like, we got to just accept that it's the end of history. We got to just accept that there's no such thing as post-capitalist desire. And, like, you got to just chill out and just become an object and just let capitalism sweep you away, man. There's no, it doesn't sound like Crisis to me. Whereas Burial, sounds critical as in crisis. It's a bad vibe. I mean, it's dark, it's muted and it's all fucking SSRI'd out, like antidepressanted out. But, but there's a humanity there. That's the thing. Vaporwave to me always seemed, emptied of humanity, But that's why the shit's, not going to really be remembered. But on the topic of Vaporwave-ish stuff and the sort of, hypnagogic pop that they were calling it, is sort of like right before Vaporwave, like in the early 10s, some artists who I do like and who I assume Fisher liked. I don't know if Mark Fisher wrote about them, but two hauntological artists that I'm feeling are One O Tricks Point Never, and Ariel Pink. These are both artists who, when I first heard them, I actually did not like, and boy, was I fucking wrong. Two of the greats of our time, I think. Yeah, it's you take someone like Ariel Pink. I mean, he was definitely rummaging through the past. There's a retroness to it, and there's that haunted thing, haunted graffiti. I think his music was hauntological and, haunted by this no future kind of end of history thing. But his his personality just as an individual was just so shining through, like just so nutty and kind of unique, that it gives it that humanity. Even though it's the end of history, it's not the end of humanity, you know. So there's that. And I feel like kind of the same thing with One O Tricks. Less completely, you know, the personality is less totally like iconoclastic and quirky, but as his stuff kind of has gone on, you hear this like a personality to it. So there is this human element, this like sort of human way of dealing with the end of history, or the sense of no future, the capitalist realist neoliberal fucking impasse that we're at. Now, but the thing is, even though those two artists are great and they're kind of, they do, you know, to me have the hauntological thing, I don't think they would really pass Fisher's exact, you know, his criteria for revolutionary post-capitalist culture. Because for Fisher, I mean, he's very much a communist, really. And at the end of his life, he was working on this book, Acid Communism, which it is so sad that he never finished that. Yeah, it's a part of what's hellish about capitalism is this atomized, lonely, solitary, sealed off individualism taken to this atomized pathological point. And so for him, you know, the collective is such an important part, the communal communism. And so, you know, I think that's why he was so into club-related music and jungle and stuff like that back in the day, because it was very forward-looking, futuristic. There was a sense of the future. There was a sense of annihilating the past and imagining a future, and it's communal and collective because it's got that club dance culture, which someone like Ariel Pink does not. That is very much an individual. Same with OPN. It, you know, it kind of reminds me of my own trajectory, honestly, man. Thinking about, you know, returning to reading Fisher, man, I really start to like look at my own arc and realize that it's become somewhat conservative in a sense, not on purpose, but maybe just by necessity. Because I think about Z's to Extra Life and then to Psalm Zero. It's like with Z's, we were really, first of all, it was very much a collective group. And, you know, even though we didn't have a specific politics, there was this sense of critique, of being critical of the world. I mean, we did have this sense that what we were doing mattered as some larger cultural critique, like this vector that other people could hop on. Like it wasn't so much an individualistic thing, you know. We were very unique as a band, but there was this sense that we're trying to push things somewhere and that there was this vision for the future. We were way into Adorno, you know. And Adorno is another guy, you know, I mentioned Gramsci in relationship to Fisher. Adorno, I think Fisher, it was very Adornian in that sense of that sort of negative leftism, you know, that leftism that is believing that music really can have this revolutionary Marxist anti-capitalist thrust, but that part of that is not being a poptimist. Part of that is drawing lines and being like, no, this is shit, this is the real shit. This is just pastiche, this is futuristic, you know? And yeah, having that sense of negativity. Yeah, Z's, we were way into Adorno. And then I moved on to Extra Life. Extra Life was more just individualist. That's just me and my fucking self, you know? And see, this is the thing. Music like that, you can be original on like an Ariel Pink kind of tip, and be original in the sense that you are going off on your own little individualist tangent, because, you know, human beings are always unique. So if you express that, then that's going to be new in a sense. But that individualism, the quirkiness, the iconoclasm, that doesn't move things, you know, from Fisher's perspective, that does not really move. That's not the thrust that moves things to a post-capitalist future. You know, it doesn't have the collective thing. So, you know, I have to admit and say that, my work, Extra Life, was, as much as it was about originality, it was a diagonal off to the side, like a sidestepping, individualist kind of originality, not a utopian vision, not a political utopian vision that can be a collective revolutionary project. I mean, it was never supposed to be, but you really see how essentially, in a sense, conservative this radical individualism kind of is. And then get to Psalm Zero, and I'm just sort of unabashedly like, yeah, just want to make great rock music, metal, whatever you want to call it, just heavy and dark, man, and I mean, that's like almost not even trying to be original. I mean, I can't help but be original, guys. But you understand what I'm saying? It's like, it's even less on some, I mean, Psalm Zero, if someone said that's retro, that's 80s, sounds like Depeche Mode, sounds like Catatonia, I'd be like, yeah, sounds about right. And then, I'm doing Nothing Human, and I'm doing my, I did Simple Answers and my orchestral music. That stuff's weirder. I mean, it's definitely weirder and more personal. But in all these cases, it's not building a utopian movement, But anyway, to finish up, as far as stuff that really is hauntological now, haunted by, that's sort of dealing with this issue of no future, but stuff that I think there are potentials for real radical futuristic culture that isn't just based on individuals being individual weirdos, and certain musicians who actually are directly influenced by Mark Fisher. I mean, people who are like, there's like, scenes of musicians who are like directly into him. People I'm thinking of are, Holly Herndon. Holly Herndon is like, I mean, that shit is futuristic. So I don't know if Mark Fisher was familiar with her music, but I mean, that sounds like now. I mean, that, I don't know really where her politics are, but I mean, it's fresh and new enough that, and not in a quirky individual way, but in a way that could be a movement-ish, communal. Holly Herndon and these people like this Lee Gamble I was listening to. There's this whole label in New York called Purple Tape Pedigree, PTP. It's run by this guy Gang. They're dealing with this electronic music that is sort of rap and noise influenced, but comes out of club music, and it's in that tradition. DeForest Brown Jr. is a guy who is dealing with Fisher. But he's really dealing with race very, very specifically. But yeah, these, I see music. I see this culture of like electronic music, coming out of club music with these people that I mentioned, Low Tick. This stuff that really is mind-blowingly futuristic and seems to me in the spirit of music thrusting towards post-capitalist desire and this sort of communal sense of moving forward, and the negativity of annihilating the past, or not the entire past, but that negativity to bring you forward, that leftist negativity. I gotta say, it seems to me that I'm not just saying this to like signal wokeness or anything, because I don't do that. But I think it's not going to be white people who are really doing this, and not white men. I mean, it just seems, I'm not saying we couldn't or can't. Mark Fisher was white and a man, so it's not an identity politics thing necessarily, but I am seeing this scene that I'm talking about, this electronic music, with like Purple Tape Pedigree and Holly Herndon and DeForest Brown Jr. These artists are not, they're not white males, and it's probably not going to be us that does it. But hey, this is no form of self-deprecation, because I'm gonna make deep music one way or the other, because I'm just gonna do that. But just because music is deep doesn't mean that it's deep in that way, where it has a political communal force forward to sort of overcome this sort of capitalist realist canceled future. Music has a right to children. What is that, the Boards of Canada record? I didn't never love them really, but they sound like the future, at least. There's something there. So Mark Fisher, the books to check out: Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative? Ghosts of My Life is a collection of essays. And if you start going past the music stuff and you want to get into this insane cybernetic theory, check out his PhD thesis, which is called Flatline Constructs, Gothic Materialism, and Cybernetic Theory. That shit is bonkers and amazing. All right. Thanks. See you all next time.